Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to Good Measure, and my name is David. I'll be your host today. Today, we have Thomas Niederkrotenthaler, an associate professor and head of this unit of suicide research and mental health promotion at the Medical University of Vienna, Medical University of Vienna, Austria, with over 100 articles published on suicide prevention. He's here today to talk with us about mental health research and media and the media effects on suicide. Thomas, thank you for being here with us today. Do you mind quickly introducing yourself to those in the audience who may not be familiar with you or your research?
Thank you, David, for having me on your podcast. And thanks also for making a good job with saying my name. So I'm Thomas Niederkrotenthaler from the Medical University of Vienna. I'm leading the research group for suicide prevention here. We have had a very strong focus on the question how media portrayals of suicide and of coping affect individuals who are suicidal, who are in a severe crisis. So that's our primary research focus here, and I'm really glad that you are focusing on our findings today.
Okay, so most of today's youth are very glued to their phones. So in your research, how much of an impact has social media influencers and the content in social media had on the youth and their perceptions of themselves, whether it be either body image or success?
Mm-hmm. Well, social media and media in general definitely have a strong effect on different kind of behaviors, not exclusively on suicide or on coping with mental health problems or serious adverse circumstances in life. They have an impact on a range of different outcomes, including body images. There's good research showing that if there are social media portrayals that kind of glorify ultra slender models, for example, that this has a harmful impact on others and might increase that problem. And the same applies actually to suicide. I'm really happy to have this conversation with you today. And it also applies for positive behavioral outcomes, like, for example, how to cope with a suicidal crisis. And that's what we have found in the Logic song. So there's certainly a lot that social media celebrities can do in order to help prevent suicide and to improve outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about the Logic song, I want to quickly turn our attention to that exact song released on April 28th, 2017, titled 1-800-273-8255 by Logic, and the impact that it has had on many of its listeners. When a singer like that of such popularity and power like Logic makes a song that has such a positive message, how does it affect his fan base or even those who just watch the video who are battling with this depression or in a time of crisis? Is there ever a worry for the opposite to happen despite such positive intentions?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Logic song for us in suicide prevention has been really a unique example of a suicide prevention message, actually. It has been unique because it's a song. Normally, as you probably know, most of the prevention messages are just an expert speaking about the problem and how to potentially solve it. It's not really an entertainment product like a song. And the second thing, it's suicide prevention, but it's not really at all about suicide. It's really about coping with adversity. So this makes this song really unique. And obviously, if Logic has a wide audience, he's very well known. So actually the exposure to his message is much stronger than any mental health expert could ever have with just giving an interview, for example. So that was really unique in this song. And this was actually the opportunity for us in suicide prevention to assess if there are any changes in help seeking and in suicides. And indeed, there were such positive changes once the song was released, and it was also featured on the MTV Video Music Awards and in the Grammy Awards. So it had a truly large impact. In terms of our concerns, No, there haven't been really any concerns with the type of message that Logic went out, because it was really focusing on a young man actually who is having a really hard time for being gay, and he then calls the lifeline and gets help from the lifeline. So that's really a story of hope and recovery. It's not a story of suicide. So we were not concerned of seeing any negative impacts. However, in the past, there have been so-called prevention stories, which actually focused on suicidal acts instead of coping with suicidal thoughts and feelings, which is what the Logic song is about. And there we have had indeed some negative impacts as well. However, we did not see that, and neither did we expect this for the Logic song.
Could you tell us a bit more about like the findings and the research, like, and specifically like the data on the song, and how and the specifics about like how much the calls towards the suicide hotline soared after his initial performance in 2017?
Yeah, so what we did is we really looked at social media data from Twitter in order to see when the song was really discussed in the media on Twitter. And we found that this was the case particularly during 34 days. These were related to the song release. They were related to the MTV Video and Music Awards in 2017 and to the Grammy Awards. And there was really a 34-day period where there was a strong public discussion on social media about the song. And then we looked into the calls during this period and compared it to calls outside of that period. So we did an analysis, which is called a time series analysis. In such analysis, it's really important to consider that calls are not always the same. For example, in a few months of the year, there are more calls than in others. Then there is a generally increasing trend in calls. And when you do research on that, you need to account for those differences over time. That's what we did. And what we found was that there was really nearly 10,000 additional calls during that 34-day period to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This is really a strong increase in calls. It's about 6.9% more calls than would have been expected based on the numbers outside of that period. And during the same period, we also found a drop in suicides. It was about 245 fewer suicides than we would have expected during that period without the song. And this is a decrease of about 5.5%. So it's a quite impressive number, actually, and it really strengthens our hypothesis that this kind of message in a song, in an entertainment product, which reaches a large audience over a sustained period of time, that this can really have a positive impact on help seeking and on suicide.
So speaking about helping others and potential negative effects, could you quickly speak on the Werther effect, and could you briefly explain to the audience, and how does the Werther effect work, and how exactly can we minimize it?
Sure. So in suicide prevention research, we have for a very long time, when we looked into the effects of media, only looked at harmful effects. And that's what the Werther effect is about. So this dates back until the 1960s, when in the United States, the first studies came out that showed that there was an increase in suicides after the portrayal of celebrity suicides, particularly for example, on the title page of the New York Times. So this was then called the Werther effect, and there is now evidence from more than 100 studies supporting this effect. And particularly when there is a celebrity suicide that is repetitively reported, giving details about suicide methods used, then there is that risk of having that harmful effect, the Werther effect. And we have found in a study published in 2020 that there was about an increase of 13% in suicides after such portrayals of suicides by celebrities. And it's possible to prevent these negative effects. For example, if a story about the death by suicide focuses more on the life of the person. For example, let's take the example of Robin Williams. Robin Williams' suicide was associated with a large increase in suicides in the United States. So if the portrayal of his death focuses more on his life, how did he contribute to the arts? How did he make us laugh, for example? Not so much on the suicidal act per se, then this negative effect can be prevented. So it's not that all stories about suicide result in a Werther effect. It's really those stories which are repetitive, which focus on suicide methods, and which involve people who are very well known and have a good social status in the community. And interestingly, this obviously also applies on the opposite side of the medal, so to say, with regards to positive media effects, which is called the Papaschino effect. And here you had Logic's song. Logic is obviously a very well-known celebrity, and he has a strong fan base, and he reaches people that mental health experts, for example, would typically not be able to reach. So these are all ingredients together with his story, which is a story of coping, not really a story of suicide. It's a story of coping with suicidal thoughts and feelings. Then you can have this protective effect, the Papaschino effect.
All right. I also heard that I was reading your paper, and in that you wrote celebrities, but also non-celebrities have an important role in suicide prevention if they communicate about how they've coped with crisis situations and suicidal ideation. This is when celebrities share their stories of coping and overcoming suicide. These stories, it's the Papaschino effect, right?
Exactly.
It's how the celebrities have shown like the positive side and how they've been able to overcome hardships in their life, right? Is that how
exactly?
It is?
That's what it is really about. So those stories which have the Papaschino effect, they really focus on how to cope, how to deal with adversity, how to deal with mental health issues, how to deal with difficult life situations. That's what the Papaschino effect stories are about, and that's what the Logic song is about. And celebrities can have an extremely important role in getting out the message. But it's not only celebrities, it's also lay people like you and me, who might give the stories about how they have coped with adversity, what they have done. And then others might identify with that story. And we have found in a few studies that it's the mechanism, how this works, is really via identification. So if people are able to identify with the story or with the characters shown or with the protagonist or with logic, for example, then the chances increase that there will be a positive effect. And that's why it is so important to get very different stories out, because there's not a one size fits all approach. People identify with different stories. People have different problems. So the stories should reflect really different problems, different types of people. And if we have a lot of stories out there in the media, then this might really make a big difference to suicide prevention. And I'm always saying, you know, David, there are stories of hope and recovery they are everywhere, but unfortunately they are rarely in the media, but otherwise they are everywhere. If you are discussing about life with anyone out there, there will be stories of hope and recovery, and it's so important to get them out also via the media in order to have this positive effect.
So I actually wanted to talk about the media use of suicide prevention experts. So when actually going through the process of putting something online for suicide prevention, how do experts go through and make sure that their ads or their sort of whatever they publicize encourages those in danger to seek help? How do they make sure that their ads do not trigger the Werther effect? Because I think that's something that you've talked about, and how it's sort of hard for experts to reach a certain demographic.
Yeah, sure. And it's not only about the experts reaching the audience, it's really people who have been suicidal, who want to tell their story, and a lot of them do. And how can they do it in a safe way? How can they really emphasize on coping instead of emphasizing suicide and having a potentially unintended effect on suicides? So I think the main point here really is that the stories that result in a Papaschino effect, they are really focusing on how to address difficult life situations from a personal perspective. There's nothing more powerful than an individual telling their own stories of how they have dealt with a specific life problem that might have included suicidal ideation, it might have included a suicide attempt, or it might be about how to cope with loss to suicide. So all of these stories, they are really helpful if they really focus on how to cope. The focus is not on any suicide method or on a suicidal act. It's about how to cope, how to improve, how to make a network, for example, with others in order to be safe. So these are the ingredients of the Papaschino effect. The problem really is if the story focuses, for example, on a specific suicide that happened, and then the message should be something like, well, there are so many suicides out there, but you should seek help. That's a really problematic storyline, and we have seen several examples in the past which have been very unfortunately associated with increases in suicides if there was a focus on suicidal acts, suicide methods, etc. So that's basically the main difference between these two different effect types and between the storylines which are associated with these effects.
So that's basically it for the questions I have. Is there anything that you would like to tell the audience? We're probably mostly a high school, college, and slightly above college audience. Is there anything that you'd like to tell them? Is there anything that you'd like to tell to anybody out there who's struggling, who might be watching this video?
Well, it's extremely important to speak about suicidal thoughts and feelings if they come up. For example, to look for a trusted adult and speak about it, that's certainly a very important first start. And then, of course, there's professional help available, and it's always making sense to seek such help, even in cases if you've had a negative experience with some help seeking in the past. Give it another try. It may be totally different. It's always the right thing to do. And for example, help is available from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and there are other organizations which provide help for specific types of problems as well.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, sure, it's my pleasure. Thank you.